The worst generation is over. It took 15 years to build up this meticulous fictional pirate tower, and now Oda is smashing it right back down. From a starting number of 12, 5 candidates have dropped out of the Pirate King race, and we can expect more imminently. This is the business end of the business. Unfortunately, we don't live in some sort of lovely pirate utopia where everyone gets a participation trophy. No, you get the crown or you get not that. And this has been a long time coming. Oda himself has said that even he is amazed at how long the worst generation has lasted, and he's also given us some very keen insights into their future. But before we get to that, I think it's always worth reminding people that the worst generation are the greatest accident in all of literary history. The introduction of these 9 pirates on Sapodi Archipelago expanded the One Piece world by an order of magnitude. For this whole time, we had been following one single crew, and to discover that there were 8 other groups of protagonists all engaged in their own fun, simultaneous adventures, it blew my mind. Within the space of a single chapter, it made the world feel 8 times bigger than it already was. To think that there were at least 8 different unexplored adventures that could lead us to the same point as the Straw Hats was one of the boldest decisions I think Eiichiro Oda has ever made. I would honestly read an entire manga series about each and every one of these characters, and they were all a complete accident. In the 27th log, a question is posed to Oda regarding characters who played unexpectedly big roles in the series, to which he answers, "I have to mention Law." Actually, it's not too much to say that all supernovas have more highlight scenes than I imagined. I created the supernovas right before the chapter where they got introduced. None of them existed in my plot notebooks before that chapter. I was in a desperate situation, worrying, at this rate, Sapodi Arc will not be interesting enough. And can I just say, it's even crazier than that. It's well known that the worst generation are improvised along with the Warlords, but what's less well known is exactly how quickly Oda achieved the speed run for their designs. In One Piece Grand Countdown, a special series published in the Void month between pre and post timeskip, one of Oda's editors, Kohei Onishi, states that Oda created all 9 supernovas in approximately 3 hours. 9 characters in 3 hours, which means that every character was given roughly 20 minutes of attention before being flung into the most successful manga series of all time. Characters like Trafalgar Law were really nothing more than a sketch on a bar napkin, desperately being stuffed into a chapter right before its due date. So I hate using words like talent and genius because I think they often take away from hard work, but I have no other words for this. And neither does Oda himself, because he goes on to say, "The inspiration for 9 supernovas came to my mind unconsciously. I should have reduced the number of supernovas since there were too many, but after all, I made all of them appear in the manga. I'm really surprised that they all survived till now. I thought half of them would drop out of the tough new world already." And just a reminder that this comment was made in 2017. At that point, we were in the latter half of Whole Cake Island, and evidently, not that he'd really thought too hard about it, but Oda had certainly expected most of the worst generation to be out of the race by this point. And I suppose it did happen with one of them actually. Jewelry Bonnie lost both her crew and her ship retime skip, but the others were still very major players, like Kid, who Oda singles out. They are the worst. They are the worst generation indeed. I imagined Kid would become an important character, but Law, I didn't imagine he would become such an important character. Weekly serialization is a wonderland. That line about Kid is quite ironic in retrospect, because I feel like Kid was meant to be Law, the second big favorite Luffy rival man. But what this boils down to is a round of story soup. Oda, our narrative chef, thought that what he was cooking up was far too bland to serve our refined palates, so he went to the pantry, took out, checks notes, literally everything, and dumped it in the soup, hoping that this desperate, and I mean desperate maneuver would somehow compound and enhance the flavors. And we got some interesting ingredients such as a spicy red head, a sweet pink head, a sour orange head, and a character who canonically eats spaghetti through the holes in his mask head. Killer loves pasta in general. Why am I telling you that? Because it's going to be surprisingly important later. But this unconventional story cooking, it worked. Like, it really worked. And after 3 hours in the kitchen, Oda gave birth to a group known as the 11 Supernova, named after the explosion of a star. So certainly making some big narrative promises there, but they were later renamed to the Worst Generation, which I think sets expectations at a much more manageable level. If they become the best, well, of course they become the best because they're the worst. But if they kind of fail, then well, of course they failed. I mean, they're the worst. Although there's actually a very fun in-world explanation for why this may have happened. The Supernova name was almost certainly conjured by Big News Morgans. However, this was put to print before Blackbeard made his big public debut, so Morgans had to very quickly retcon his own story to add Blackbeard, and thus he rebranded the group as the Worst Generation. That bird but man, control so much more of the story than we know. But these improvised 9 characters were like a series of 9 simultaneous tech startups, and fans really invested heavily at the ground floor, with some investments paying off and others leaving people in a state of clout bankruptcy. For example, Trafalgar Law stocks appreciated tremendously. For every clout dollar invested in Law in 2008, fans saw at least a 20 times return on that investment. Trafalgar Law is the only character, other than Luffy, who has ever beaten Zoro in an officially conducted popularity poll. And speaking of Zoro, Oda once drew this curious image of the worst generation, which, for unknown reasons, leaves Zoro out, which I personally think is a bit rude. I mean, if Killer is there, then Zoro should also be there. But fine, I'm not going to die on this hill. I have a much nicer hill picked out. Meanwhile, Kid stocks were subject to high levels of speculation. Having been introduced with a higher bounty than Luffy, investors expected a tremendous return on clout, only for the Kid market to remain at a price best described as mid until the great Kid crash of 2023, the second annual marketplace disturbance following the Basil Hawkins crash of 2022. In retrospect, it was not the smart place to invest. Like a Theranos situation, Kid, he looked too good to be true. However, one surprise winner includes Capone Gang Beige, by far the least popular supernova upon introduction, but one who gave quite a decent payout during Whole Cake Island and even got to take on his own cover story. But speaking of story, the truth of the matter is that the story is ending. We can't ride these characters to the moon. Although they can literally ride to the moon if they wanted, because that's a thing you can do in One Piece. But these threads need to and have already started to wrap up. Kid and Killer have been eviscerated. Basil Hawkins is potentially outright dead after Wano. Drake might be right behind him in the line to dinosaur heaven. And as important as she still remains, Bonnie was evicted from this race long ago. One Piece, and I cannot stress this enough, One Piece is not a massage parlor. Not every character can have a happy ending, especially when they're all competing for more or less the same goal. So all of these characters who were introduced to add flavor to a single arc and never really intended to play major roles need to be dealt with in some way, shape, or form. About half of the worst generation is out at this point, and you can expect more to follow. And the fan reaction to this has been a bit mixed. There is a sense of dissatisfaction, which I do think is natural, considering that these characters have been set up for 15 years at this point. Whether Oda intended to do it or not, that's what he did. He planted seeds and waited 15 years, and now we're finally seeing which characters became big, glorious, thicksome, trunky trees, and which characters became itty-bitty pot plants. With that said, the worst generation dropouts are likely not gone from the story. I do not expect Kid and Killer to die, for example, and they almost certainly have some role to play going forward. Honestly, I'd also be surprised if Hawkins was actually dead, and Drake as well, because he still has a fair bit of potential with the whole sword story thread. But what about everyone else? Well, with Capone, he's sitting in a pretty good spot. We've explored him so much more than most members, and unlike the rest of this Pirates-some gaggle, he doesn't seek personal power. Beige is much more interested in destabilizing systems and watching the ensuing chaos, which he's actually already accomplished. While the world may never see it this way, his role on Whole Cake Island led directly to the defeat of Big Mom on Wano. And now, if he so desires, Capone can just sit back and watch the anarchy play out for his own personal entertainment. This could be his own version of Happily Ever After. Oh, and also, I keep forgetting to point this out on the rare occasions when Beige does come up, but Oda said that his animal resemblance would be a koala. Although Jewelry Bonnie is the character who would allegedly be Australian. And as a result, it always makes me imagine a very Australian Bonnie holding a beige koala. Scratchman Apu also exists, and I think we've gotten about as much depth out of him as we're gonna get. He's an opportunist, he's not gunning for the Pirate King role. His whole deal is more to side with whichever force is gonna deliver him more profit. So thinking about it, who's left for him to ally with? Luffy? Shanks? Probably not. Blackbeard is a potentially good choice, because the two do share a love of general dickery, but to me, Apu is most at home with Buggy, because in the end, Apu is just a musical clown. Although I suspect that Apu's ultimate fate will be betraying one too many people, I definitely don't think he has a good ending. Mad Monk Rouge is the most mysterious player left in the game, who fits quite nicely into the final saga with his connection to the Sky People. I doubt he'll be an emotionally centric character like a Law or a Bonnie, so does he become a temporary Capone-style ally, or does he become a Scratchman Apu-style enemy? What I will say is that Rouge seems very at home with the Blackbeard lifestyle of general debauchery. For a monk, he really does like to indulge in excessive alcohol and intercourse. I'm not making that up, those are Oda's words, not mine. But the thing about Rouge is that all of his actions so far have resulted in his defeat, and I don't see the future being any different. Meanwhile, Law has a fairly immediate bad future incoming, but a solid place in the story going forward, which leaves us with Luffy, Zoro, and Blackbeard. Of all of the worst generation, these are our top 3 finishers. 2 of them gunning for Pirate King, and 1 of them set to become the world's greatest swordsman. Titles and status that completely transcend the concept of the worst generation, because this group, as we know it, is over. Each of these 12 pirates have had their time and their shot at achieving their desires. Some have succeeded and will continue to succeed, rising to become legends of their era. However, some have catastrophically failed and will become nothing more than footnotes. Not everyone can be the pirate king. In fact, not everyone can achieve whatever their dreams are. And Oda has actually revealed the fallback plans of the worst generation. So I now present to you the mundane but inevitable future of the worst generation. Trafalgar Law goes on to become a GP, and next door to his practice is Capone Gang Beige, who has opened a high-class shoe store because something Italian. Next door to him is Killer, who has opened his own pasta restaurant. I told you that would be important. The dude really likes pasta. However, across the road from Killer is a competing pizzeria owned by Jewelry Bonnie and very potentially staffed by Mr. Four, whose dream was to become a pizza boy. Next to Bonnie's pizzeria is the office of Basil Hawkins. Next to Bonnie's Pizzeria is the office of Basil Hawkins, who is a freelance interior designer. He primarily uses this office to meet clients, but gets most of his work done next door at Mad Moncarouge's Cabaret Club, featuring Scratchman Apu as the local DJ for hire. And then way down the road, we have the destiny of Diaz Drake. After Wano, he has rounded up the Toby Ropo and imprisoned them, but has been mistaken for a zookeeper. And people keep paying him to see all the dinosaurs, so he just kind of accepts that he has a good thing going and hopes that this won't turn into a Jurassic Park situation. And as for good old Eustace Captain Kidd, well, as expected, he goes straight into the garbage. Ooh, that was loud. He becomes a degenerate. According to Oda, Kid would be a weapons dealer, primarily due to his tangible lack of skills in any area other than violence. No doubt wandering Supernova Street up and down and up again, constantly hiding from the police, which Oda said would be Zorro. And that, I'm afraid, is the rather mundane end of the worst generation.